Bootstrap. So Bootstrap, we've been using it for maybe a week or so, but it's a library that collects lots and lots of really cool stylings, right, that are very useful for laying out your pages, right? So you don't have to start from scratch. Yes, certainly we could create our own grid system, right, and create our own dot row and dot column and so on and so forth, right? We could go that way and then implement our own. But these folks have been doing it for a while. They're industry standard, and they do the QAing of this, and they're very very professional. So as much as we could is we don't want to reinvent the wheel. Okay, so Bootstrap has a lot of really useful and uh, behaviors that I encourage you to reuse from their library. Also, lots of widgets that are already nicely styled. So there's several ways of using it, right? We can either just download a zip file and unzip the CSS and into our local machine. That's only useful for development purposes. As you're developing, if you include all the CSS in your code, right, in your project, your IDE will parse those files and will support you, right? As you type, will do type ahead. It will find these classes and do all validations for you. It's really, really great support from, well, at least IntelliJ. That gives you really nice support when you are coding, right? Now, for production, when you're going to deploy this, right, actually when you making it go live, the ideal is the best practice is not to have the CSS, not host it yourself. Instead, host it from a CDN, right? A well-respected, widely used CDN, content delivery network, that is hosting the same file you would be hosting anyway, right? And the idea is that these CDNs are widely used by other folks, right, that are much more known than you are, and chances are that they've folks have already visited these other very famous websites before getting to you. So chances are is that they already have this style sheet downloaded in their browser, right? In the browser, instead of downloading it again from you, it will already have it cached in their browser. Yes, so it will increase your performance because you'll be listing a file that the browser will already have, right? So that's preferred. Also, this particular library is a family of new libraries that are targeting mobile first methodology, right? Where you start thinking about designing a website or page with the largest demographic audience first, right? Which is folks using their phones or tablets, small screens. That's the largest growing population of how folks are visiting your website. So it might as well cater to the most people that are going to come to you. Yes, so you should start designing your application with that in mind. Who's going to come to see this? Somebody with a small screen, right, with a phone. So it's easier to start small and grow as you need to, right? To start thinking about your application in portrait mode, right? And as other folks might visit it with larger screens, you can always say, oh well, with something bigger, maybe I'll show something else. Yes, it's harder to design it the other way around. It's hard to start thinking big, right, and then slowly start removing. It's easy to start small and add. All right. Also, because when we start with a large screen, with a landscape screen, especially us, techies, we just want to, put stuff on the screen, right? We go, oh, what am I going to put in this corner? What am I going to put in that corner, right? Usually we're not representative of the population at large. We're tech savvy. We can handle a lot of throughput data. Most folks will not be tech savvy, right? So the easier you can go on them, right, on the amount of material, the better experience they might have. Yes. So mobile first forces you to think on what is the absolute most important thing that I want to show. I have this little screen, so the area is premium. The top most row or heading, it's you have very little space. I really have to think what I'm going to put in there. Yes, I don't want people having to scroll, right, or having to navigate to go find things. So definitely forces you to think. So once you start thinking about it, and you need to configure your browser to handle and be friendly with small screens, right? So the default behavior of browsers, the default behavior is to try to replicate the big screen. Right? So a phone, if you're visiting a website that is not mobile friendly, will try to fit and render the big screen on this tiny little screen, right? Forcing you to zoom in, right, and see what the heck you're looking at, right? Right. So that's typically not a mobile friendly. So what you have to do is tell the browser, says, hey browser, don't try and fit this whole thing in this small screen. You know, I need to override that behavior and say instead, you know, use the following. Use the width of the device, right? I want you to use this. Don't try to scale it down into 10% of the original size. Don't try to scale it. Leave it in the original size. Okay, and be mindful of the width of the device. Okay, so that's one of the things. So you do that in the meta tag, right? You're gonna convert the name of the viewport, and you're gonna configure the scaling 1-to-1, right? So do not try to scale it down so it fits, right? And I think it was it when the iPhone first came out, right? That they're showing Safari that you could visit real pages, right? And you know they were selling it as a great thing that you could visit these big pages and they could render it and you could have to zoom in to anywhere. I think you could like double tap and it would zoom in and then double tap and then zoom out. Uh, so using this mechanism, you're not forcing folks to zoom in and pinch and zoom or double tap to zoom in and see anything, right? The screen should always be in a font that I can read without having to use these other mechanisms. Another thing that is not shown here, you can also turn off pinching and zooming, right? Ideally, you won't need to do that, right? Ideally, the what you see is the correct size that that is consumable by the human eye, right? So you can do that as well here. You can turn off pinching and zooming, and maybe the scaling you might depending on how you want to look at it, you could have different scaling as well. Uh, the container fluids that we saw earlier, right? We saw that Bootstrap provides all sorts of classes for adding some borders around it. Typically, the browser by default will put I think it's like an 8-pixel border all around the content, right? And you can override that. It says, well, no, I don't want any of that margins, right? I don't want any of that padding. Instead, you can override it by classes like such as container fluid or container. All right, so let's take a look at the grid system.